What if the richest man in the world discovered that all his billions couldn't buy him the one thing a homeless child possessed naturally? What if a simple gesture from a stranger's daughter made him realize he had been living as the poorest person on earth? This is the true story of Marcus Wellington, a tech billionaire worth $47 billion, who built walls so high around his heart that even his own family couldn't reach him. It's about Zara, a 9-year-old girl living on the streets, who carried more wealth in her spirit than most people accumulate in a lifetime. And it's about the moment when these two worlds collided on a rainy Thursday evening, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of love can shatter the biggest fortunes. Some stories are about gaining everything. This one is about losing everything that doesn't matter to find the only thing that does. Because in the end, the question isn't how much you can accumulate, but how much you can give away and still feel rich. Get ready for a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about success, family, and the true meaning of wealth. Marcus Wellington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a circuit board of lights and ambition. At 52, he commanded an empire worth $47 billion. Yet tonight he felt like the poorest man alive. The irony wasn't lost on him, though he quickly pushed such thoughts away as he always did, with work, meetings, and the endless pursuit of more. The Wellington Tech Tower pierced the skyline like a steel and glass monument to human achievement. Inside its walls, Marcus had built something extraordinary. His company revolutionized how the world communicated, creating technologies that connected billions of people across continents. Politicians sought his counsel, celebrities begged for his attention, and business leaders studied his every move. He was Time magazine's Person of the Year 3 times running, Forbes' most influential CEO for the past decade, and the man who turned code into gold. But success, Marcus had learned, was a hungry beast that demanded constant feeding. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, startling him from his thoughts. "Mr. Wellington, your daughter called again. She wants to know if you'll make it to Emma's school play tomorrow evening." Marcus closed his eyes. Emma, his granddaughter, 7 years old, with his late wife's green eyes and a smile that could light up any room. Sarah, his daughter, had been calling for weeks about this play. Emma had landed the lead role as a fairy princess, and apparently she'd been practicing her lines every night, asking when Grandpa Marcus would come see her perform. "Tell Sarah I'll try my best," he said, knowing even as the words left his mouth that they were empty. There was the board meeting with the Japanese investors, the conference call with the European division, and the critical decision about the merger that could add another $12 billion to his net worth. A child's school play seemed insignificant against such enormous stakes. "She said to remind you that Emma specifically requested you come. Apparently, she told her whole class that her grandfather owns the building with the big blue light on top." Marcus glanced at the building's signature LED crown, pulsing blue against the night sky. The child was proud of him, even though he'd missed every birthday, every holiday, every meaningful moment of her young life. The guilt gnawed at him, but he buried it beneath spreadsheets and strategic planning, the way he'd buried everything else that threatened to make him human. The intercom buzzed again. "Also, sir, your driver is waiting downstairs. You have the charity dinner in 30 minutes. Marcus straightened his tie and grabbed his jacket. The charity dinner was another obligation, another appearance where he'd write a check with enough zeros to make headlines and pose for photos with grateful recipients. It was good for the company image, tax efficient, and kept the board members' wives happy with their social causes. As he rode the private elevator down 60 floors, Marcus reviewed the evening's agenda on his tablet. The dinner was for underprivileged children in the city, hosted by the mayor's wife and attended by the usual collection of wealthy philanthropists who treated charity like a competitive sport. He'd give his standard speech about corporate responsibility, present a ceremonial check for $2 million, and be back home by 10:30. The limousine glided through the city streets like a shark through dark water. Marcus barely looked up from his emails as they passed blocks of towering apartment buildings, small businesses, and the gradual transition from gleaming corporate district to the rougher neighborhoods where real people lived real lives. His world existed in boardrooms, private jets, and exclusive clubs. The city beyond his tinted windows might as well have been another planet. The charity dinner was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a five-star establishment where Marcus owned a 20% stake. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the soft murmur of polite conversation. Women in designer gowns air-kissed each other, while men in $1,000 suits discussed market fluctuations over champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. Marcus moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and mentally calculating how much each conversation might be worth to his business interests. The mayor's wife, Mrs. Richmond, greeted him with the enthusiasm reserved for major donors. "Marcus, so wonderful to see you. We're absolutely thrilled that Wellington Tech is our platinum sponsor this year. It's our pleasure, Patricia. The work you're doing with these children is truly admirable." The words rolled off his tongue automatically. He'd given this same speech dozens of times, to dozens of organizations, for dozens of causes. It was the cost of doing business at his level: write the checks, make the appearances, maintain the image of corporate citizenship. During dinner, a video presentation showed the charity's work in action. Images of smiling children flashed across the massive screens. Kids in after-school programs, families receiving food assistance, teenagers learning job skills. Marcus watched politely while mentally reviewing tomorrow's schedule. The Japanese investors would arrive at 9, the conference call was at 11, and, somewhere in between, he needed to decide whether acquiring the smaller tech firm in Berlin was worth the regulatory headache. The mayor's wife took the stage to introduce the evening's special guests, 3 families whose lives had been transformed by the charity's programs. Marcus applauded along with everyone else as a single mother named Maria took the microphone, her voice trembling with emotion as she thanked the donors for helping her son get into a good school. "Because of your generosity," Maria said, her eyes bright with unshed tears, "my boy has a chance at a future I could never have given him alone. When he hugs me goodnight and tells me about his day at school, I know that hug is possible because of people like you." Something in her words made Marcus shift uncomfortably in his chair. When was the last time someone had hugged him with genuine affection? When was the last time anyone in his life had looked at him and seen anything beyond his bank account? His own daughter kept their conversations strictly business, and Emma was too young to understand why Grandpa was always too busy to visit. The presentation continued, but Marcus found his attention wandering. He thought about Sarah's latest call, how she'd mentioned that Emma had been asking why he didn't come to see her anymore. "She thinks you don't love her, Dad," Sarah had said, her voice carrying the weight of old disappointments. "I try to explain that you're busy, but she's 7. She doesn't understand why money is more important than she is." Marcus had bristled at the accusation. "It's not about the money," he'd replied. "It's about building something that lasts, creating a legacy." "For who?" Sarah had asked quietly. "If you're too busy to spend time with the people who love you, who's going to inherit this legacy of yours?" The question had haunted him for days, though he'd never admitted it to anyone. What was the point of building an empire if there was no one who truly wanted to share it with him? His wealth had given him everything he'd ever thought he wanted, but somehow it had also taken away everything he'd never realized he needed. After the dinner, Marcus sat in his limousine as it navigated the late-night traffic back to his building. The city looked different in the darkness, more honest, somehow. The harsh fluorescent lights of all-night laundromats and corner stores revealed a world that existed parallel to his own, a world where people struggled and survived and found meaning in things that couldn't be measured in stock options or market capitalization. His phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, I just wanted to remind you about Emma's play tomorrow night. It starts at 7. And she really, really wants you to be there." Marcus looked out at the passing streets, noting the few pedestrians still walking despite the late hour. "Sarah, you know how complicated my schedule is. I'm trying to close a major deal this week." "There's always a major deal, Dad. There's always something more important than your family." Her voice was tired, resigned. "Emma's been practicing her lines for weeks. She tells everyone that her grandfather is going to see her be a princess. I'll do my best to make it," he said, though they both the next evening arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made the city feel smaller and more intimate. Marcus sat in his office, staring at the agenda for tomorrow's board meeting while rain streaked down his windows like tears on glass. The Japanese investors had been accommodating about rescheduling their meeting, but the European conference call had run 3 hours longer than planned, and now it was already 6:15. Emma's play started at 7. His phone had been buzzing with messages from Sarah all day. The last one simply read, "She's wearing her costume already. She keeps asking if you're coming. Please, Dad, just this once." Marcus looked at the stack of contracts waiting for his review, then at his watch. If he left now, he might make it to the school by 7:30. He could catch the second half of the performance, maybe take Emma out for ice cream afterward. It would be something, at least. But as he reached for his coat, his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Wellington? I have the preliminary numbers from the Berlin acquisition team. They need your decision tonight if we're moving forward." The numbers were staggering. The acquisition would cost $2.8 billion, but would position Wellington Tech as the dominant player in European markets for the next decade. It was the kind of opportunity that came along once in a generation, the kind of deal that would cement his legacy as one of the most visionary businessmen in history. "Give me conference call with the Berlin team," he heard himself saying. "And call my daughter. Tell her I'll try to make the next play." Marcus spent the next 2 hours dissecting profit margins and regulatory requirements while somewhere across town, Emma stood on a small school stage wearing a shimmering costume and looking hopefully toward the back of the auditorium where her grandfather never appeared. She delivered her lines perfectly, curtsied gracefully, and smiled bravely when the other grandparents came forward with flowers and cameras. By the time Marcus finished his call and sealed the Berlin deal with his electronic signature, it was nearly 10 o'clock. The school would be empty, Emma would be home, and probably asleep, and another opportunity to be part of his family's life had slipped through his fingers like water. He sat in his limousine as his driver navigated the wet streets, feeling the familiar weight of choices that couldn't be undone. The rain had intensified, turning the city into a blur of neon reflections and hurried pedestrians ducking under awnings and into doorways. Marcus barely noticed when they stopped at a red light near the small park where he'd glimpsed the homeless camp the night before. But tonight, something made him look closer. Under the harsh glare of the streetlight, partially sheltered by a large oak tree, was a scene that made Marcus lean forward in his seat. A woman sat on a wooden crate, her arms wrapped around a small girl who couldn't have been older than 9 or 10. They were both soaked despite their makeshift shelter of cardboard and plastic sheeting. The woman wore a thin coat that had seen better days, and the child was bundled in what appeared to be several layers of mismatched clothing. What struck Marcus wasn't their poverty or their obvious discomfort in the rain. It was the way the child leaned into her mother's embrace, how she seemed to find perfect contentment in that simple gesture of protection and love. Even from his distance, Marcus could see the smile on the little girl's face as she looked up at her mother, saying something that made the woman laugh despite their circumstances. The light changed and the limousine moved forward, but Marcus twisted in his seat to keep watching. The child had pulled out something from her jacket, a small stuffed animal, and was apparently telling her mother a story about it, using animated hand gestures that made the toy dance through the air. The mother listened with complete attention, as if this bedraggled stuffed animal and her daughter's imagination were the most important things in the world. "Stop the car," Marcus said suddenly. His driver, James, had worked for him for 15 years and rarely questioned his instructions, but tonight he hesitated. "Sir? Here. Yes. I'll just be a moment." Marcus stepped out into the rain, immediately feeling the cold droplets soak through his $1,000 suit jacket. He walked slowly toward the makeshift shelter, not entirely sure what he intended to do. As he got closer, he could hear the child's voice carrying on the night air. And then, Princess Buttercup told the dragon that she didn't want to fight, the little girl was saying, making her stuffed bear bow politely to an invisible dragon. She said, "Mr. Dragon, you look sad. Do you need a hug?" And the dragon was so surprised that someone was nice to him that he started crying happy tears. The woman noticed Marcus approaching and instinctively pulled her daughter closer, wariness replacing the warmth in her expression. Marcus realized how he must appear, a wealthy stranger emerging from an expensive car in the middle of the night. He stopped several feet away and raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, raising his voice slightly over the rain. I saw you from the car and wanted to make sure you were okay." The woman studied him carefully. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with kind eyes and the weathered hands of someone who'd worked hard all her life. "We're fine, thank you," she said politely but firmly, just waiting for the rain to let up. The little girl peeked around her mother's arm, studying Marcus with open curiosity. She had bright, intelligent eyes and a spray of freckles across her nose. Despite their circumstances, she didn't look afraid or defeated. If anything, she seemed genuinely interested in this unexpected visitor. "Are you lost, mister?" she asked with the fearless directness of childhood. "You look all fancy, but you're getting really wet." Marcus almost smiled despite himself. "I suppose I am getting pretty wet. My name is Marcus. What's yours?" "I'm Zara. And this is my mama, Linda," the girl replied before her mother could stop her. "We're telling stories to pass the time. Do you want to hear about Princess Buttercup and the crying dragon?" "Zara," her mother warned gently. "The man probably needs to get somewhere." But Marcus found himself shaking his head. "Actually, I'd like to hear the story, if you don't mind." Something in his tone made Linda's defensive posture soften slightly. She gestured for him to step under their makeshift shelter, though it provided minimal protection from the rain. Marcus hesitated for only a moment before accepting the invitation, crouching down to fit under the low plastic roof. Up close, he could see the incredible ingenuity that had gone into their temporary home. Cardboard had been carefully folded and reinforced. Plastic sheeting was secured with clips and stones, and someone had even created small channels to direct rainwater away from their sleeping area. It was clear that this wasn't their first night without proper shelter. "Okay," Zara said, settling back against her mother's side with her stuffed bear in her lap. So Princess Buttercup sees this really big, scary dragon, but instead of running away, she walks right up to him. And do you know what she says? Marcus shook his head, finding himself genuinely curious about the conclusion of this impromptu fairy tale. She says, "You're the biggest, strongest dragon I've ever seen, but you look lonely. Would you like to be friends?" Zara made her stuffed bear reach out toward Marcus as if offering a handshake. And the dragon was so surprised that he forgot to breathe fire. And instead, he just started crying because nobody had ever wanted to be his friend before. "That's a beautiful story," Marcus said, and meant it. Did they become friends? "The very best friends," Zara confirmed with satisfaction. "And the dragon taught Princess Buttercup how to fly. And she taught him how to give the best hugs in the whole kingdom." The end. Linda stroked her daughter's hair with infinite tenderness. "That was perfect, sweetheart. But I think we should let this gentleman get back to his car before he catches pneumonia." Marcus realized that his expensive suit was indeed soaked through, but, strangely, he wasn't eager to leave. There was something about this simple shelter, about the warmth between mother and daughter, that felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. "How long have you been?" he began, then stopped, not sure how to phrase the question without sounding intrusive. "Living like this," Linda finished for him. "About 6 months. I lost my job when the restaurant I managed closed down, and we couldn't make rent. I've been looking for work, but it's hard when you don't have an address to put on applications." "What kind of work do you do?" Marcus asked. "I was in restaurant management for 12 years. I can do books, scheduling, inventory management, customer service, pretty much everything except cooking." Linda's voice carried no self-pity, only matter-of-fact resignation. "I've got interviews lined up, but most places want to see pay stubs and references, and my old boss disappeared when the restaurant went under." Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. It took him a moment to recognize it as genuine concern for another human being's welfare. "What about temporary shelters? Assistance programs?" Linda's smile was tired but not bitter. "The shelters are full most nights, and the waiting list for assistance housing is months long. We're managing, though. Zara's still going to school during the day. I make sure of that. And we've got each other, which is more than some people have." As if to illustrate her mother's point, Zara snuggled closer to Linda's side. "Mama gives the best hugs in the world, she announced to Marcus. Better than Princess Buttercup, even. When I'm scared or cold, she just hugs me, and everything feels better. Marcus watched this simple exchange, and felt something crack open inside his chest. When was the last time anyone had sought comfort in his arms? When was the last time his presence had made someone feel safer, warmer, better? His granddaughter Emma was probably lying in her bed right now, wondering why the most important man in her life was too busy for her school play. You know, he said slowly, I own a company that's always looking for good management people. Would you be interested in coming in for an interview? Linda's eyes widened with surprise and hope, but then clouded with caution. That's very kind of you to offer, Mr. Wellington. Marcus Wellington. Recognition dawned in Linda's expression. Even homeless, even struggling to survive, she knew the name. Everyone in the city knew about Marcus Wellington and his tech empire. Oh, she said quietly. That's your building with the blue light. It is, Marcus confirmed. And I'm serious about the job offer. We need someone to manage operations at our satellite office downtown. It's mostly administrative work, but it comes with full benefits and enough salary to get you back on your feet. Linda stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Marcus looked at Zara, who was listening to the conversation with bright-eyed interest. Let's just say I recently learned something about the value of kindness. But even as he made the offer, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one receiving the greater gift. In the space of 20 minutes under a makeshift shelter in the rain, this homeless mother and daughter had shown him something that all his billions couldn't buy: genuine love, contentment in simplicity, and the kind of happiness that came from human connection rather than material accumulation. Zara suddenly reached out and touched Marcus's hand with her small, cold fingers. Mr. Marcus, you look sad, she said with the startling perception of childhood. Do you need a hug? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. A hug. When was the last time someone had offered him something so simple, so freely given, with no expectation of anything in return? When was the last time anyone had looked at him and seen not his net worth or his business empire, but simply a person who might need comfort? Before he could think of how to respond, Zara had scooted closer and wrapped her small arms around his shoulders, pressing her face against his wet jacket. She smelled like rain and childhood and hope, and her embrace carried a warmth that had nothing to do with body temperature and everything to do with the generous spirit that poverty hadn't been able to touch. Marcus sat frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift of unconditional affection. Then, slowly, carefully, he wrapped his arms around the small girl and held her close. Tears began to slide down his cheeks, mixing with the rainwater already there. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotions he'd buried for decades. Thank you so much. When Zara finally pulled back, she smiled at him with genuine happiness. Feel better now? Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Linda watched the exchange with tears of her own, recognizing something profound had just occurred. The rain began to lighten, and Marcus knew he should return to his car, his building, his world of endless obligations. But he also knew that something fundamental had changed in the space under that cardboard shelter. A homeless child had offered him the one thing all his money couldn't buy: simple, uncomplicated love. As he stood to leave, Marcus pulled out his business card and handed it to Linda. Call my office tomorrow. Ask for Rebecca Chin. She's my human resources director. Tell her I sent you. Mr. Wellington, Linda said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know how to thank you. You already have, Marcus replied, looking at Zara, who was settling back into her mother's arms with her stuffed bear. You both have. As he walked back to his limousine, Marcus felt lighter than he had in years, despite his soaked clothing and the late hour. Behind him, he could hear Zara's voice picking up the thread of another story, something about a lonely giant who learned how to make friends. In his car, warming up as James drove him home, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. He pulled out his phone and called Sarah. Dad? She answered on the first ring, her voice thick with sleep and surprise. Sarah, I'm sorry about tonight. I missed Emma's play, and I know there's no excuse for that. Silence stretched between them, filled with years of similar apologies and broken promises. I want to make it up to her, Marcus continued. What's she doing this weekend? Dad, it's okay. I know you're busy. No, Marcus interrupted. It's not okay. I've been busy my whole life, and Saturday morning arrived crisp and bright, with the kind of autumn sunshine that made the city look like it had been painted in golden watercolors. Marcus stood in his bathroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror, feeling nervous in a way he hadn't experienced since his first board meeting 30 years ago. He was about to spend an entire day with his 7-year-old granddaughter, and he had no idea what to expect. The night after meeting Zara and Linda had been transformative in ways Marcus was still trying to understand. He'd called Rebecca Chun at home, something he'd never done before, to personally ensure that Linda would be fast-tracked through the hiring process. By Friday afternoon, Linda had been offered a position as operations manager at Wellington Tech's downtown office, complete with a salary that would allow her and Zara to move into a proper apartment within the month. But the job offer, generous as it was, felt like the easy part. The real challenge was learning how to be a grandfather, how to connect with a child who barely knew him despite sharing his DNA. Marcus had canceled 3 important meetings to clear his schedule for the day. His board members were bewildered. His assistant was concerned he might be having a breakdown, and Marcus himself wasn't entirely sure he wasn't. But, for the first time in decades, business felt secondary to something more important. Emma was waiting on Sarah's front porch when his driver pulled up, practically bouncing with excitement despite the early hour. She wore jeans with grass stains on the knees, bright pink sneakers, and a jersey for a soccer team called the Lightning Bolts. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she carried a small backpack decorated with cartoon animals. "Grandpa Marcus," she shouted, running toward the car as soon as she saw him emerge. The enthusiasm in her voice made his chest tight with emotions he wasn't prepared for. "Hello, Emma," he said, kneeling down to her level as she crashed into his arms with the unrestrained affection that only children possessed. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and childhood adventures. "I can't believe you're really here," she said, pulling back to look at his face as if to confirm he wasn't a mirage. "Mommy said you might be too busy, but you came. Are we really going to the zoo? Can we see the elephants? And the penguins? Oh, and the butterfly house." Marcus found himself laughing at her rapid-fire excitement. "We can see everything you want to see. We have the whole day." Sarah appeared in the doorway, watching the interaction with careful hope. She looked tired, the way single mothers always did. But there was something in her expression that Marcus hadn't seen in years, genuine happiness that he was there. "She's been awake since 6, Sarah said, walking over to them. "She laid out her clothes last night and made me promise 3 times that this was really happening." "It's really happening," Marcus confirmed, looking into his daughter's eyes. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out what was important." Emma's soccer game was a revelation. Marcus had attended board meetings in glass towers, given presentations to world leaders, and negotiated billion-dollar deals, but he'd never felt prouder than when Emma scored her first goal and pointed directly at him in the stands. She was small for her age, but fearless on the field, diving for balls that bigger kids missed, and encouraging her teammates with the same generous spirit he'd seen in Zara's embrace. "Did you see that, Grandpa Marcus?" she asked breathlessly during halftime, running over to where he sat on the bleachers. "I almost scored 2 goals. You were amazing," he told her, and meant it. "I've never seen anyone play with so much heart." "Coach says the heart is the most important part," Emma replied seriously. "She says if you play with your heart, you're already winning, even if the score says something different." The wisdom from the mouth of a 7-year-old hit Marcus harder than any business advice he'd ever received. How long had he been playing without his heart? How long had he been measuring victories in numbers instead of moments like this? After the game, which the Lightning Bolts won 4-2 with Emma contributing 2 goals and 3 assists, they drove to the city zoo. Marcus realized it was the first time he'd been there in over 40 years, and seeing it through Emma's eyes was like discovering it for the first time. She wanted to see everything, but she didn't just want to look. She wanted to understand. Why did the giraffes have such long necks? How did the seals swim so fast? Could the monkeys really understand each other when they chattered? Marcus found himself learning alongside her, seeing the wonder in creatures he'd never thought to appreciate before. At the elephant enclosure, they watched a mother elephant gently guiding her calf with her trunk, keeping the baby close while allowing it to explore. They love each other, Emma observed, pressing her face against the viewing window. The mama wants to keep her baby safe, but she also wants him to learn things. That's what love looks like. Marcus watched the elephants with new eyes, thinking about his own relationship with Sarah, about the distances he'd maintained in the name of building something lasting. What good was a legacy if it came at the cost of the relationships that gave life meaning? Emma, he said carefully, do you think your mom loves you? Of course, Emma replied without hesitation. She works really hard to take care of us, and she always has time to read me stories and help with my homework. Even when she's tired, she still gives the best hugs. And do you love her? Emma looked at him as if he'd asked whether the sky was blue. More than anything in the whole world. What? Marcus struggled to find words for what he was feeling. I'm just learning about different kinds of love, I guess. They spent an hour in the butterfly house, where Emma delighted in having the colorful creatures land on her shoulders and outstretched hands. She stood perfectly still, hardly breathing, as a monarch butterfly with wings like stained glass perched on her nose. He chose me, she whispered in amazement. Out of everyone here, he chose to visit me. Marcus watched his granddaughter's face, radiant with joy over something that couldn't be bought or earned or negotiated. The simple gift of a butterfly's trust. He thought about Zara, offering her hugs so freely, without calculation or expectation. There was a pattern here, a lesson about love that he was finally beginning to understand. For lunch, Emma insisted they eat at the zoo's cafe, even though Marcus could have taken her to any restaurant in the city. She ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and chocolate milk, declaring it the best meal she'd ever had simply because they were eating it together. Grandpa Marcus, she said, swinging her legs from the picnic table bench. Are you rich? The question caught him off guard. Why do you ask? Well, Mommy says you have a really big company, and you live in that tall building with the blue light. And your car is really fancy, and you wear suits that look expensive. Marcus wasn't sure how to answer. Wealth had defined his identity for so long that he'd almost forgotten there were other ways to measure a person's worth. I have a lot of money, he said finally. Does that bother you? Emma considered this seriously, taking a bite of her sandwich while she thought. Nope. Money's just stuff, right? What matters is what you do with it, and how you treat people. The wisdom of children, Marcus reflected, was often more profound than anything adults could devise. What do you think I should do with my money? Help people, Emma said without hesitation. Like that lady and her little girl you told me about. The ones who didn't have a place to live. You helped them, and now they're not sad anymore. That's the best thing to do with money. Use it to make people not sad. Marcus had told Emma a simplified version of his encounter with Linda and Zara, explaining that sometimes people needed help and it felt good to provide it. But he'd left out the part about how much they had given him in return. What if I told you that they helped me more than I helped them? Emma looked puzzled. But you said you gave them a job and money for an apartment. I did. But they gave me something more valuable than money. What's more valuable than money? Marcus looked at his granddaughter, at her grass-stained jersey and chocolate milk mustache, at the pure trust and affection in her green eyes. Love, he said simply. They reminded me what love feels like. After lunch, they visited the petting zoo, where Emma introduced Marcus to a goat named Ferdinand who apparently remembered her from previous visits. She showed him how to hold his hand flat when feeding the animals carrots, and how to move slowly so he wouldn't frighten the smaller creatures. Animals can tell if you're scared or mean, she explained with 7-year-old authority. But they can also tell if you're nice. You just have to be gentle and patient. Marcus thought about his approach to business, to relationships, to life in general. How often had he prioritized strength over gentleness, efficiency over patience? How many opportunities for real connection had he missed because he'd approached them like acquisition targets rather than living, breathing beings who deserved care and consideration? As the afternoon wound down, they found themselves sitting on a bench near the duck pond, watching families of waterfowl paddle across the calm surface. Emma had grown quiet, leaning against his side with the comfortable familiarity of a child who felt truly safe. Grandpa Marcus? She said softly. Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad you came to my soccer game. And I'm glad we got to spend the day together. I was starting to think you didn't like me very much. The words hit Marcus like a physical pain. Oh, Emma, I like you more than you could ever imagine. I love you more than you could ever imagine. Then, why don't you visit us more often? It was the question he'd been dreading and hoping for all day. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that he'd been so busy accumulating success that he'd forgotten to actually live? How could he tell her that he'd been afraid of love because it couldn't be controlled or measured or guaranteed? I thought I was building something important, he said finally. I thought that working all the time and making lots of money was the best way to take care of our family. But I was wrong. Emma looked up at him with those wise, green eyes. What's the best way to take care of family? Being with them, Marcus replied. The truth is clear as the autumn sky above them. Loving them. Showing up when they need you. Like you did today. Like I'm going to do from now on. If you want me to. Emma's smile was brighter than all the lights in his corporate tower. I want you to. And I think Mommy wants you to too. She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking. I think she misses having a daddy. The observation pierced Marcus's heart. Sarah had been taking care of herself, and Emma, for so long that he'd forgotten she was his daughter, not just an efficient single mother who happened to share his last name. When had he stopped being her father and become just another distant relative who sent birthday checks and Christmas gifts? As they prepared to leave the zoo, Emma insisted on stopping at the gift shop. Marcus expected her to ask for something expensive, but instead she spent 15 minutes choosing a small stuffed elephant that reminded her of the mother and baby they'd watched earlier. It's not for me, she explained as Marcus paid for the toy. It's for that little girl you helped. What was her name? Zara? I thought she might like to have a friend to go with her bear. Marcus stared at his granddaughter in amazement. Here was a child who had received so little of his time and attention over the years, and her first thought after a perfect day was to share her happiness with someone she'd never met. That's very thoughtful of you, he managed. That's what families do, Emma replied matter-of-factly. We take care of each other, and we take care of people who need help. Right, right. Marcus agreed, though he was just learning the truth of it himself. On the drive back to Sarah's house, Emma fell asleep against his shoulder, worn out from a day of soccer and animals and unlimited grandfather attention. Marcus held her carefully, marveling at how such a small person could carry such enormous capacity for love and wisdom. When they arrived at Sarah's house, she was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of barely contained curiosity. How did it go? She asked as Marcus carried the sleeping Emma inside. It was perfect, he said, settling his granddaughter on the couch and covering her with a throw blanket. She's amazing, Sarah. Absolutely amazing. She gets that from her mother, Sarah said with a tired smile. She gets it from her family, Marcus corrected, including the parts of her family who are just learning how to show up. They stood in Sarah's living room, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of a life lived with love, children's books, family photos, art projects stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. It was the kind of home Marcus had never created, too focused on acquisition to understand the value of accumulation that couldn't be measured in dollars. Dad, Sarah said quietly, I don't know what happened to make you want to spend time with us, but I'm grateful. Emma's been happier today than I've seen her in months. Marcus thought about Zara's arms around his shoulders, about Linda's gentle strength, about the lesson in love he'd received from a homeless child in the rain. I met someone who reminded me what matters, he said. A little girl who has nothing but gives everything. She taught me that I've been living like the poorest man in the world while thinking I was the richest. I don't understand. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports, but his mind kept drifting to the afternoon's planned visit. He and Emma were going to see Zara and Linda in their new apartment, and Marcus found himself more excited about this social call than any business meeting he'd attended in recent memory. The transformation in his own life had been remarkable. For the first time in 30 years, Marcus was leaving the office before 7 o'clock most evenings. He'd attended 2 more of Emma's soccer games, taken her to breakfast 3 times, and even managed to make it to a parent-teacher conference where Sarah had introduced him as Emma's grandfather who's learning how to be part of our lives. The changes hadn't gone unnoticed in the corporate world. Business magazines speculated about Marcus Wellington's sudden shift in priorities, with some investors expressing concern about his decreased availability for evening meetings and weekend conference calls. But the numbers didn't lie. Wellington Tech continued to thrive, and Marcus was discovering that a more balanced approach to leadership actually improved his decision-making. More importantly, the changes had transformed his relationship with his family. Sarah called him regularly now, not just for emergencies or obligations, but to share stories about Emma's day or ask his advice about parenting decisions. Emma had started visiting his office after school sometimes, doing her homework in the conference room while he finished meetings, filling the sterile corporate environment with laughter and crayon drawings. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The cold, efficient businessman who had built an empire was gradually being replaced by someone warmer, more connected, more human. It wasn't always easy. Decades of emotional distance couldn't be erased overnight. But every day brought small victories in the art of being present for the people who mattered. Linda Chun had exceeded every expectation in her new role at Wellington Tech. She'd streamlined operations, improved employee morale, and implemented several cost-saving measures that had already saved the company over $300,000. More than that, she'd brought a sense of humanity to the corporate environment that had been missing for years. Employees at the downtown office spoke of feeling more valued, more heard, more connected to the company's mission. Marcus had visited the downtown office several times, officially to check on the new operations manager, but really to see how Linda was settling in. Each time, he was struck by her grace and professionalism. She never made him feel like he was owed gratitude for changing her life. Instead, she treated the job opportunity as what it was, a chance to prove her abilities in an environment that valued her contributions. "She's remarkable," Rebecca Chun had told Marcus during their last meeting. "I've had executives with MBA degrees who couldn't handle half of what she's accomplished in 3 weeks. She has this natural ability to see what needs to be done and find the most efficient way to do it, but she also genuinely cares about the people she works with." "Any regrets about fast-tracking her application?" Marcus had asked. "None whatsoever. If anything, I wish we'd found her sooner." Now, as Marcus prepared to leave the office for his visit with Linda and Zara, he reflected on how one moment of genuine human connection had created ripples of positive change in multiple lives. He'd helped a homeless family find stability, yes, but they'd given him something invaluable in return, a roadmap back to his own humanity. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement when Marcus picked her up from school. She'd been talking about seeing Zara again for days, planning games they could play and stories they could share. In her backpack, she carried not only the stuffed elephant from the zoo, but also several of her favorite books and a friendship bracelet she'd made in art class. "Do you think she'll remember me?" Emma asked as they drove through the city toward Linda and Zara's new apartment. "We only met that one time when she came to your office with her mom." "I think she'll remember you," Marcus assured her. "You're pretty unforgettable." The meeting at Wellington Tech had been Emma's idea. She'd been so eager to meet the little girl from her grandfather's stories that Sarah had agreed to bring her to the office during Linda's first week. The two girls had connected instantly, despite their different backgrounds and experiences. Emma had been fascinated by Zara's stories about living outdoors, while Zara had been amazed by Emma's tales of soccer games and school plays and grandfathers who owned tall buildings. Linda and Zara's new apartment was in a modest but well-maintained building about 15 minutes from Emma's school. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was home. Marcus had helped with the security deposit and first month's rent, but Linda's salary was more than enough to cover their expenses going forward. Zara answered the door before they even finished knocking. Her face lit up with the same warm smile Marcus remembered from that rainy night under the cardboard shelter. She looked different now, well-fed, rested, wearing clean clothes that fit properly. But her essential spirit remained unchanged. "Emma." "Mr. Marcus," she exclaimed, launching herself into Emma's arms for a hug that nearly knocked both girls over. "I can't believe you're really here." "Mama, they came. They really came." Linda appeared behind her daughter, wearing a simple blue dress and an expression of genuine happiness. The stress lines around her eyes had softened over the past 3 weeks, and she carried herself with the confidence that came from knowing she could provide for her child. "Welcome to our home," she said, gesturing for them to come inside. "It's not much, but it's ours." The apartment was small but cozy, with 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a kitchen that smelled like something delicious was cooking. Linda had worked magic with the limited space, using bright throws and plants from the dollar store to create an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. Children's artwork covered one wall, and a small bookshelf held what appeared to be a collection of library books and donated volumes. "This is wonderful," Marcus said, and meant it. "You've made it feel like a real home." "Zara helped with the decorating," Linda replied, ruffling her daughter's hair affectionately. "She has very strong opinions about where everything should go." The girls immediately ran off to Zara's bedroom, where Emma presented her with the stuffed elephant and the friendship bracelet. Their delighted squeals and chatter filled the small apartment with joy, and Marcus found himself smiling at the sound. "Coffee," Linda offered. "Or I made some lemonade if you prefer." "Lemonade sounds perfect." They sat at Linda's small kitchen table, listening to the girls play in the next room while catching up on the past few weeks. Linda shared stories about her new job, about learning the company's systems, and building relationships with her coworkers. She spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found her footing after a long period of uncertainty. "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity," she said, her hands wrapped around her glass of lemonade. "It's not just the job itself, though that's been wonderful. It's having a future to plan for again, being able to tell Zara that we'll still be in the same school district next year, knowing that we can afford to live somewhere safe." "You've earned every bit of it," Marcus replied. "Rebecca tells me you're the best operations manager they've had in years." Linda blushed at the compliment. "I love the work. It feels good to use my skills again, to feel useful and productive. And the people there have been so welcoming. I was worried about fitting in, but everyone's been incredibly kind." "That says as much about you as it does about them," Marcus observed. "Kindness tends to attract kindness." From Zara's bedroom came the sound of storytelling, with Emma's voice picking up the thread of one of Zara's adventures. The 2 girls had developed an instant friendship based on their shared love of imagination and their mutual capacity for seeing wonder in ordinary things. "I have to ask," Linda said quietly, "what made you stop that night? I mean, really. You were clearly successful, clearly had places to be. Most people would have driven right past." Marcus considered the question carefully. It was something he'd been thinking about himself, trying to understand the moment when his comfortable distance from human suffering had suddenly become unbearable. "I think I'd been living like a machine for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be human," he said finally. "That night, I saw real love between you and Zara, real connection, real happiness despite your circumstances. It made me realize that I had everything I thought I wanted, and none of what I actually needed." "And what did you need?" "What Zara gave me in that hug. What you showed me in the way you held your daughter. What I saw in Emma's face when she offered to share her toy with a little girl she'd never met." Marcus paused, searching for the right words. "I needed to remember that love is the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "Zara talks about you sometimes. She calls you the sad man who needed a hug. But she doesn't think you're sad anymore." "I'm not," Marcus admitted. "Thanks to both of you. I'm learning how to be happy in ways I'd forgotten were possible." The afternoon passed quickly, filled with games and stories and the easy conversation that flowed between people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The girls put on an impromptu puppet show using stuffed animals and pillows, with Zara playing a brave princess and Emma voicing a wise dragon who solved problems with kindness rather than force. As evening approached and it came time to leave, Emma asked if they could make this a regular tradition. "Can we visit every week?" she asked, looking back and forth between the adults for approval. "Please, Zara, and I have so many more stories to tell each other." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Marcus said, looking to Linda for confirmation. "We would love that," Linda agreed. "Both of you are welcome here anytime." As they prepared to leave, Zara suddenly ran to her bedroom and returned with something in her hands, the one-eyed stuffed bear that had been her companion during their nights on the street. "I want Mr. Marcus to have Teddy," she announced, holding out the worn toy. He kept me safe when I was scared, and I think Mr. Marcus might need someone to keep him safe too. Marcus knelt down to accept the gift, understanding the magnitude of what she was offering. This bear wasn't just a toy. It was her security, her comfort object, her faithful companion through the hardest period of her young life. Zara, this is very special to you, he said gently. Are you sure you want to give him away? I'm not giving him away, she corrected with 9-year-old logic. I'm sharing him. Teddy likes to help people, and he helped me so much that now I want him to help someone else. Besides, I have my elephant friend now, and I live in a safe place with Mama. But maybe sometimes you get scared in your big tall building, and Teddy can remind you that you're loved. Marcus accepted the bear with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed once again by this child's capacity for generosity. Thank you, he managed. I'll take very good care of him. And he'll take very good care of you, Zara replied with absolute confidence. On the drive home, Emma chattered excitedly about her new friendship and all the plans she and Zara had made for future visits. But Marcus found his attention divided between his granddaughter's happy voice and the small, worn bear sitting on the seat beside him. That night, in his penthouse apartment that had always felt more like a luxury hotel suite than a home, Marcus placed Teddy on his nightstand where he could see him. The contrast was striking, the expensive furniture and artwork surrounding a child's beloved toy that probably cost less than the thread in his silk pillowcases. But somehow, the presence of that little bear made the apartment feel more like a home than it ever had before. Before bed, Marcus called Sarah to tell her about the visit. A year later, Marcus stood before a room full of business leaders, philanthropists, and community organizers at the annual Downtown Development Summit. The venue was the same hotel where he'd attended countless charity dinners over the years, writing checks, and making appearances while remaining fundamentally disconnected from the causes he supported. Today was different. Today he was here to announce something that would fundamentally change how Wellington Tech engaged with the world. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying across the packed ballroom. A year ago, I thought I understood what it meant to be successful. I measured my worth in quarterly earnings, market share, and stock valuations. I believed that the highest form of achievement was accumulating more money, more power, more recognition. In the audience, he spotted familiar faces. Sarah sat in the front row with Emma beside her, both beaming with pride. Linda was there too, now promoted to Regional Operations Director, her confidence and competence having earned her rapid advancement within the company. Zara sat next to her mother, fidgeting slightly in her best dress, but listening intently to every word. Then, I met a 9-year-old girl living on the streets, Marcus continued, who taught me that I had been the poorest man in the room, despite being the richest on paper. She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in what you have, but in what you're willing to share. Not in what you can buy, but in what you can give freely. Not in the height of the walls you build around yourself, but in the bridges you create between yourself and others. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. This wasn't the typical corporate responsibility speech they'd expected from Marcus Wellington. This was something raw, personal, transformative. That little girl offered me a hug when I needed it most. And in that simple gesture, she gave me something worth more than my entire fortune. She reminded me that love, freely given and freely received, is the only currency that really matters. Marcus paused, his eyes finding Zara in the audience. She was holding Teddy, the one-eyed bear she'd asked him to return after she decided he'd helped Mr. Marcus long enough and should come home. The bear now split its time between their two households, a traveling ambassador of comfort and love. Today, I'm announcing the Wellington Foundation for Community Connection with an initial endowment of $5 billion. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. But this foundation won't just write checks to existing charities. We're going to do something different. We're going to focus on creating genuine human connections between people from all walks of life. The foundation, Marcus explained, would fund programs that brought together people who might never otherwise meet. Mentorship programs that paired business leaders with struggling families. Community gardens where homeless individuals worked alongside suburban residents. storytelling circles where children from different socioeconomic backgrounds shared their dreams and fears, after-school programs where senior citizens taught life skills to teenagers while learning about technology in return. We're going to invest in the radical idea that every person has something valuable to offer and something important to learn, Marcus said. We're going to create opportunities for the kind of authentic human connection that changes lives, not just for the recipients of charity, but for everyone involved. The Foundation's first major project would be the Community Connection Campus, a multi-use facility in the heart of the city where people from all backgrounds could come together for classes, workshops, shared meals, and collaborative projects. There would be job training programs run by successful business people, art classes taught by local artists, homework help provided by retirees, and community dinners where everyone was welcome regardless of their ability to pay. The goal, Marcus explained, isn't just to help people in need. It's to help all of us remember that we need each other, that the businessman in his corporate tower and the mother struggling to make rent have more in common than either realizes, that the college student and the elderly widow both have wisdom to share and loneliness to heal, that every act of genuine connection makes our entire community stronger. After the presentation, during the reception that followed, Marcus was surrounded by people wanting to learn more about the Foundation. Some were skeptical about the unconventional approach, questioning whether such soft interventions could create measurable impact. Others were intrigued by the possibility of philanthropy that focused on mutual benefit rather than one-way charity. But the conversation that mattered most to Marcus came when Emma tugged on his sleeve and asked if she could talk to him privately. "Grandpa Marcus," she said as they stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city, "I'm really proud of you." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me. I have a question, though." Emma looked thoughtful, the way she did when she was processing something complex. "All that money you're giving to help people, is it going to make you poor?" Marcus smiled at the question, remembering a time when he would have measured poverty strictly in financial terms. "No, Emma. It's going to make me richer than I've ever been." "How?" "Because every time we use that money to help someone connect with someone else, every time we create a friendship or heal a loneliness or bridge a gap between different kinds of people, we add to the wealth that actually matters. The wealth of love, of community, of belonging." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Like how Zara and I became friends, and now our whole families are friends too?" "Exactly like that. And like how you learned to be my grandpa instead of just someone who sent me birthday cards." "Exactly like that too." Emma was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city lights. "I think you're going to help a lot of people find their families, aren't you?" The insight took Marcus's breath away. "I hope so, Emma. I really hope so." Over the following months, the Wellington Foundation became a catalyst for transformation throughout the city. The Community Connection Campus opened to enormous fanfare, but, more importantly, it began fulfilling its mission almost immediately. Corporate executives discovered the joy of teaching literacy to immigrants learning English. Homeless individuals found purpose in sharing their survival skills with suburban families interested in self-sufficiency. Teenagers from struggling neighborhoods formed friendships with retirees who became their mentors and advocates. One of Marcus's favorite programs paired business leaders with families experiencing homelessness, not as charity cases to be pitted, but as teachers who could share insights about resilience, resourcefulness, and the importance of community support. The business leaders often came away from these relationships more changed than the families they'd intended to help. "It's remarkable," Rebecca Chin told Marcus during one of their monthly foundation reviews. "We're seeing transformation on both sides of every relationship. The executives are learning about empathy, resilience, and what really matters in life. The families are gaining not just practical skills and job connections, but also a sense of dignity and belonging." Linda had become one of the Foundation's most effective program coordinators, using her experience of homelessness and her business skills to design initiatives that honored people's dignity while providing genuine support. Her insights had been invaluable in creating programs that avoided the patronizing tone that often characterized traditional charity work. "The key," she explained to a group of new volunteers, "is remembering that everyone has something to offer and everyone has something to learn. The moment you start thinking of someone as just a recipient of your help, You've missed the point entirely. Marcus often visited the community campus, not as the wealthy donor checking on his investment, but as a participant in the programs he'd funded. He took cooking classes from formerly homeless individuals who'd worked in restaurant kitchens. He joined book clubs that brought together CEOs and single mothers to discuss novels about overcoming adversity. He participated in storytelling circles where people from all walks of life shared the pivotal moments that had shaped their character. In these settings, people often didn't recognize him as the billionaire tech mogul. They knew him simply as Marcus, the man who asked thoughtful questions and shared stories about learning to be a better grandfather. It was an anonymity he treasured, a chance to engage with people as equals rather than as the object of either awe or resentment that his wealth usually inspired. One evening, during a community dinner at the campus, Marcus found himself sitting across from a teenage boy named David, whose family had recently lost their apartment due to his father's medical bills. David was angry, defensive, convinced that everyone looking at him saw only his failures and limitations. "I don't need anyone's pity," David said when another volunteer tried to engage him in conversation. "I don't need charity. I just need people to stop looking at me like I'm broken." Marcus understood that anger, that pride, that fear of being diminished by other people's assumptions. "What do you need?" he asked simply. David looked surprised by the direct question. "I need a job. I need to help my family. I need people to see that I'm smart and capable, not just some poor kid who needs saving." "What are you good at?" Marcus asked. "Computers. Programming. I taught myself by watching YouTube videos at the library." "Would you be interested in teaching others?" Within a month, David was running coding workshops for other teenagers at the campus, earning a small income while building his resume and confidence. He also began working part-time at Wellington Tech, where his fresh perspective and eagerness to learn made him a valuable addition to the team. "You didn't give me charity," David told Marcus months later, after he'd helped his family move into stable housing and started planning for college. "You gave me a chance to prove what I was worth." "You proved that all on your own," Marcus replied. "I just provided the platform." The foundation's impact extended far beyond the individuals directly served by its programs. The entire culture of Wellington Tech began to shift as employees became involved in community connection initiatives. The sterile corporate environment became warmer, more human, more focused on purpose beyond profit. Annual employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in job fulfillment, sense of mission, and overall happiness. Productivity increased even as the company implemented more flexible policies that allowed employees time for volunteer work and community engagement. It turns out, Marcus observed during a board meeting, that when people feel connected to something larger than themselves, they bring more creativity, loyalty, and passion to their work. Our community involvement isn't just good for the community, it's good for business. But the most profound transformation was still happening in Marcus's personal life. His relationship with Emma had blossomed into something beautiful and authentic. He attended every soccer game, every school play, every milestone that marked her journey from childhood toward adolescence. They had weekly adventures, sometimes elaborate outings to museums and concerts, sometimes simple walks in the park where they fed ducks and talked about life. Emma had become his teacher in many ways, helping him see the world through eyes unclouded by cynicism or calculation. She reminded him daily that the most important questions weren't about market performance or competitive advantages, but about whether people felt loved, valued, and connected to each other. His relationship with Sarah had healed indeed to make plans for the weekend. They talked for over an hour about Emma's friendship with Zara, about Linda's progress at work, about the ways their own relationship was healing and growing stronger. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Sarah said as their conversation was winding down. "Not for the money or the job offer, though those were generous. I'm proud of you for learning how to love openly, for making yourself vulnerable to connection. It's the bravest thing I've ever seen you do." After hanging up, Marcus sat in his living room with Teddy in his lap, looking out at the city lights that had once represented conquest and achievement. Now they looked different, like millions of individual stories, millions of people trying to make their way in the world, millions of opportunities for connection and kindness and shared humanity. He thought about the chain of events that had started with a simple decision to get out of his car in the rain. That moment of impulse, of choosing human connection over convenient distance, had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. Linda had a job and a future. Zara had a home and security. Emma had a grandfather who was learning how to be present. Sarah had a father who was remembering how to love. And Marcus had discovered that the richest man in the world wasn't the one with the most money, but the one with the most love to give and receive. As he prepared for bed, Marcus made a mental note to talk with Rebecca about expanding Wellington Tech's community outreach programs. If one chance encounter could create such positive ripple effects, what might happen if they actively sought out opportunities to make a difference in people's lives? But that was tomorrow's project. Tonight, he would sleep peacefully for the first time in decades, comforted by a child's gift and surrounded by the knowledge that he was finally learning how to be truly wealthy in all the ways that mattered most. Marcus looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully on the couch, clutching the small elephant she'd chosen for Zara. "Love, Sarah. I've been so busy building an empire that I forgot to build a family. I forgot that the richest people are the ones who love freely and are freely loved in return." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Does this mean you'll be around more? Really around, not just checking in between meetings? It means I'm going to try to become the grandfather Emma deserves, and the father you deserved all along. It means I'm going to learn how to be rich in the ways that actually matter." As Marcus prepared to leave, Emma stirred on the couch and called out sleepily, "Grandpa Marcus, are we still going to visit Zara this week?" "Absolutely," he promised. "We'll bring her the elephant and see how she and her mom are settling in." "Good," Emma murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "I want to be friends with her." Driving home through the city lights, Marcus reflected on the chain of connection that had started with a chance encounter in the rain. Zara's hug had opened his heart, which allowed him to truly see Emma, which was teaching him how to love his daughter, which was showing him what family actually meant. He thought about Monday morning, about the meetings and deals and endless pursuit of more that had consumed his life for decades. It would all still be there, but it wouldn't own him anymore. He'd found something worth more than any acquisition, more valuable than any profit margin. He'd found his way home to the people who loved him, guided by a homeless child who'd shown him that the greatest wealth couldn't be deposited in a bank, but only lived in the connections between human hearts. I've missed everything that actually matters. What's Emma doing this weekend?" Sarah's voice grew cautious but hopeful. "She has a soccer game on Saturday morning, and she's been wanting to go to the zoo for months." "Then we'll go to the zoo," Marcus said firmly. "Just me and Emma, if you're okay with that. I want to spend time with my granddaughter." The silence that followed was different, full of possibility rather than disappointment. "She would love that, Dad. She would absolutely love that." After ending the call, Marcus leaned back in his seat and watched the city pass by his window. Tomorrow he would change Linda's life with a job offer, but tonight, a 9-year-old named Zara had changed his. She'd shown him that the poorest people could be the richest in the ways that truly mattered, and that sometimes the greatest fortune was found in the simple act of reaching out to another human being. For the first time in decades, Marcus Wellington fell asleep that night feeling wealthy in ways that had nothing to do with his bank account. Knew what that meant. After hanging up, Marcus sat in silence as his driver navigated the final few blocks to the Wellington Tower. The building rose before them like a testament to ambition realized, its blue-crowned beacon visible for miles. Inside, security guards would nod respectfully as he passed. His private elevator would carry him to his penthouse in whispered silence. His empty apartment would welcome him with expensive furniture and million-dollar art that no one else ever saw. As the limousine pulled into the underground garage, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that made him look twice. In the small park across from his building, illuminated by a single streetlight, he saw a makeshift shelter constructed from cardboard and old blankets. It was clearly a homeless camp, probably one of many scattered throughout the city. The sight bothered him more than it should have. In his tower apartment, Marcus poured himself a glass of scotch, a bottle that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and stood again at his windows, looking down at the city. The homeless camp was invisible from this height, lost among the geometric patterns of streets and buildings. His world, he realized, was designed to keep such realities at a safe distance. He thought about the charity dinner, about Maria and her grateful tears, about the video of smiling children whose lives had been touched by generosity. But it all felt abstract, like watching a movie about someone else's life. When was the last time he'd felt anything real? When was the last time someone had needed him for something other than his signature on a check? The scotch burned his throat, but it couldn't warm the cold place that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in his chest. Tomorrow there would be meetings, decisions, and the endless machinery of business that had consumed his life for the past 3 decades. And somewhere across town, his granddaughter would go to bed wondering if Grandpa Marcus loved her enough to watch her be a princess for 1 hour. Marcus set down his glass and walked to his bedroom, past the awards and photographs that documented his climb to the top of the business world. In the pictures, he was always shaking hands with important people, always standing in front of corporate logos and achievement banners. But he was always alone, even when surrounded by crowds. As he prepared for sleep in his empty penthouse, Marcus didn't know that 23 floors below and 1 block away, a 9-year-old girl named Zara was curled up in a cardboard shelter, holding a stuffed bear with one eye missing. She didn't know that in less than 24 hours, their worlds would collide in a way that would shatter everything Marcus thought he knew about wealth, success, and what it truly meant to be rich. The city pulsed around them both. One man surrounded by luxury but starving for connection, one child with nothing but an abundance of hope. Neither could have imagined that tomorrow would change both their lives forever, or that sometimes the greatest fortunes are found in the smallest gestures of human kindness.